Welcome back to Patman Garage. Today we're working on the wife's 2017 RX350. We're going to do some spark plugs on it. It's just rolled over 60,000 miles on it, and they're due at 60, so let's hop to it. So the sign of a true luxury car is having an engine cover on it. So we'll get that guy removed. And then we can begin disassembly for repairs. So the front three spark plugs are really easy to get to. The back three, not so much. We're gonna have to pull that intake manifold off, or at least the upper half of the intake manifold off, and we'll get to figuring out how much we need to do to get that out. All right, so getting started on this, we're gonna pop our airbox loose. These just clip on the side there, they pop off. And then we need to unplug the mass airflow sensor. This connector is very, very stiff and very stubborn if you haven't taken it off. You need to squeeze on this back side back here. And then that'll release in the center. There's a little lock tab. Like I said, this connector gets there's a weather grommet in there, a little red grommet. You probably can see it in there. And it gets very dry over time, and we'll make that difficult to remove. And then we'll pull the rest of the intake tube off. So we're going to get a 10 millimeter on this hose clamp up here, and then we'll pull the that intake duct out of there. Also, we'll pull this hose clamp here. Actually, these just kidding, I think these just pop in and out if I remember correctly. Yeah, that'll be easier. We'll pull that out, and then we'll get our hose clamp off the top, and we'll pull the top half of the airbox out of the way. Got my 10 millimeter loose. I pulled the duct this way, and I got about this far out, and then the mass airflow sensor harness is still attached to the airbox right down in here. So I'm gonna have to get in there with a trim tool and pry up on that. And if you're following the scheduled maintenance, it's a good idea to go ahead and toss a new air filter in here at your 60K interval, like it's recommended. So I want to show you this clip just so you can see what you're working up against. So you see the two little feet that have to be squeezed to get out of the, this guy and this guy that have to be squeezed together to make it skinny enough to come out of the hole. There's actually one right here. I'll show you. You don't need to do this one, but this is just an example that is easier to get to. So see here, I'm going to just push down and squeeze, and then it is small enough that it'll fit out of the hole like that. So anyways, we're going to keep moving. We're going to keep getting this intake removed. All right, so I pulled there's a 12 millimeter bolt on the side here that holds this bracket in. Pulled that guy off, and then there's a connector here on the front of the evap purge valve. And so we're going to just set it off. I assume that's the purge valve, but anyways, we're going to set that off to the side. I got my throttle body unplugged. Same story here. We've got a weather pack connector as per the usual, and then you got a squeeze part on the middle. It's going to be on the back side. Squeeze that, pull out. Don't pull on the wires, just pull on the body of the housing. Now the throttle body has these two lines run to them, which are actually going to be coolant lines. So I'd rather not disturb that and have a coolant leak in my engine bay when I'm working. So we're just going to pop the throttle body off, which would be the 4 10 millimeter bolts around the outside. And then we'll set that to the side, and then we'll continue removing stuff. I don't feel like you have to go out and buy a electric ratchet to get this job done. You can certainly do these by hand. We're just speeding up the process a little bit here. So then the throttle body will just come loose. Now you got to be careful with this gasket back here. You don't want to lose that guy. That is very important. Without the gasket there, you'll have a major vacuum leak. So our coolant lines are still attached, so we can't go super far with this, so we're going to just figure out a way to get it tucked one way or the other out of the way enough where we're able to keep working. Something like that, probably. Not great, but it'll work for now. And then we'll continue pulling the intake manifold off. Next thing I'm going to do is pull this PCV hose off. This has a hose clamp. We're going to just squeeze the hose clamp and twist, and then that guy comes off. Again, we'll add it out of the way, and we're going to keep working. Probably going to pull the bolt for this guy, pop your little vacuum lines off, and then I think there is a bracket bolt on the back of the intake that kind of supports the weight of it. We're going to figure out where that guy is, and then we'll continue pulling the actual intake bolts off. All right, we're diving back in here. I got some of my little vacuum lines released back across here like we talked about. If you have a bolt that you don't want to lose and don't want to lose track of which one came out of what hole, just stick the bolt back in the hole a couple turns. I did that here on the 10 millimeter and the 12 millimeter. We're going to get back into the back here, so we're going to kind of move the throttle body again slightly out of our way so we can see back in here. If you see down there and then up here behind this vacuum line, I think that is, we're going to have another 12 up here. So those are going to be the support brackets for the intake manifold. What I'm planning on doing is just loosen loosen the bottom one up just enough where it's not tightly holding the bracket, and then we'll take the top one all the way out. And that way when we go to install the intake back in here, we don't have to worry about trying to move the bracket out of the way. And that should be just about it on the back side. All right, so I got the top one loose. I've got the gun between the two heater hoses here, and we're gonna take that out without losing the bolt. So I got to set the camera down. All right, so the bracket is loose back here. Put my light over. All right, bracket is loose back in here. So I just turned this bottom one, maybe a 1 turn or something like that, and then got the top bracket bolt all the way out. So it should be out of our way whenever we go to reinstall that. So we're gonna pull the top 12 millimeter bolts off the intake, and we should be just about ready to come out with it, I believe. All right, I got my intake bolts and nuts removed. So I have 2 bolts over here, a nut, 1, 2, 3 more bolts, and then a nut. So that's the order in which that they were removed across left to right. And I think that we are just about ready to pull this off. I'm gonna probably try to pry up on it a little bit, or pull up on it, see if we can wiggle it loose. Okay, well, we're already there. So we're gonna have to go over the top of these studs, or you can remove the studs, but I would probably just remove or pull the intake over the top of them. I want to make a quick point of intake gasket. Again, you got to be careful with this guy. Make sure you don't lose it. This one's at least brightly colored, so it should be a little bit easier to keep track of. But it appears that we're pretty well loose. We may have a vacuum connection or something on the back. So I'm going to figure out what that is, and then we'll pull this the rest of the way out. All right, so I got the intake partially removed, and I got several big vacuum lines running on the back here. See if I can get you some light so you can see what I'm talking about. There we go. So looks like I'm probably just gonna grab a pair of pliers and pull those hose clamps off of the white clip in the middle and pull the hoses off. There's 2. There's one that goes vertical and one that goes towards the driver's side. I'm not sure how that white clip sits on the intake. There's probably a shortcut or a secret or an extra special way to do that, but we're gonna just go ahead and pull the hoses off. Okie dokie. So I got my intake removed. Looking at it in retrospect, after the fact, looking at it after the fact, it looks like this hose that was the one that was connected to the T that goes towards the driver's side probably would have been easier to disconnect on this side on the vacuum pump here. And this other one that went vertical comes across over here to the top of the brake booster up here. So again, that probably would have been easier to disconnect outboard here instead of trying to reach behind the intake to do that. So that could probably save you a little bit of headache. Just easier access in this area. Then you just pull the hoses off with the intake. That's probably how I would do it in the future. But this certainly works. Now I've got the intake just set off to the side. I still have some of the little vacuum lines connected to it. And generally with age, these will start getting more brittle. These are still very pliable right now, but where they'll start breaking is the actual connections where they actually have to go over a flare onto a item. So just the fewer things that I take off, the better off I am on not breaking a vacuum hose that would then turn into some other sort of drivability concern in the future. So while I got the intake off this far out of the way, I'm going to do my back spark plugs back there, and then I'll reassemble everything, and then I'll do the front three that are nice and easy to get to. Well, I ended up unplugging this brown connector off of that little vacuum port switchover valve, this guy. Then I was able to set the whole intake off to the side. I still have one vacuum line connected to it, but I got at least way out of the way, which is nice. I pulled my front three coils just so you can see how those come out. There's a single 10mm bolt on each one of those, and then you're going to need a deep well spark plug socket. It's a standard 5/8 socket, and then the spark plug is way down in there, so you probably want to use an extension on top of your deep well. And then the back, same story. We have 3 ignition coils across the back. I went ahead and pulled the top, or the furthest one to the driver's side, which I guess is probably number 3. It's either number 3 or number 5, depending on how they number this engine. I don't know off the top of my head, but I went ahead and unplugged that one because the harness was pretty short on it. The other 2 I was able to leave connected and then just set them off to the side. So we'll get in there and get those back plugs out of there. Now the back 3, they're at a kind of a weird angle to work at, so having a flex head ratchet will really help that out. Otherwise you're up here into the kind of wiper cowl area. So we'll get these back ones removed, and then we'll take a look at all of the spark plugs together. Now if you're using an extension like I did, when you go to remove it and it runs into something up here and you can't actually get it all the way out of the hole, so what you need to do is, once you get it loose, use one hand to hold the socket part and push down on it, and use the other hand to pull up on the extension and separate the two. So that then once you separate the two like that, then you can actually remove the socket completely out of the hole without running into anything. So that's the plan, and same thing reinstalling. You can just drop the socket into the hole and then get your extension on it and then get it threaded in that way. Now I wasn't able to look at the torque specs before I left work, so I don't actually have these torque specs for this one, but I did measure removal torque and it took about 13 foot-pounds. Most spark plugs are 12 to 15 range, so I'll probably just put these at 15 and call it a day. Try to do this one-handed without dropping it, but yeah, so if you drop a spark plug, just go ahead and throw it away because you're going to crack the porcelain. This is the new part number. The part number on the spark plug itself matches the number on the middle line of the parts box. The Toyota part number is going to be the top one. The 90919-01263 number is going to be the Toyota number. But anyways, just a fairly normal looking spark plug, I guess. I mean, not single electrode, but nothing super fancy with it. But yeah, we're going to get this last one installed, and then we'll go back and put our coils on and start building our intake back together. So with the coil screws, they just need to be snug. They don't need to be crazy tight. So what I do, I just run them until they're snug. I'm just barely on the throttle at all. And then if you want to just, I mean, it does. I don't like torquing on them super hard, but I do like feeling stuff by hand to make sure it's actually tight enough. But just real gentle pressure on those. They're going into a stamped threaded boss. It's pressed into plastic, so you don't want to get too crazy on that and break that. That's going to open up a lot bigger headache for you. So I'm going to get my back coils reinstalled in the holes, same fashion, and I'm going to make sure I plug in this number 3 or number 5, whatever, the back one on the driver's side. Make sure I get that one plugged in as well, since it's been fully removed. Now the eagle eye viewer watching my video will notice that I've removed my intake gasket and I have reinstalled it on the bottom of the intake manifold. That'll help going back together with it. Make sure I don't pinch the gasket. And the really eagle-eyed viewer will notice that I went ahead and removed those 2 big vacuum lines that I pulled off the back of the intake, and they are now on the intake. So I'm going to reinstall it the way that I thought I should. After knowing more about it, I would remove it this way. So we're going to put it back together this way. So I went ahead and pulled the hose off the booster side and pulled this hose off of the vacuum pump. So when we go back together with it, I can show you more closely how that will look. And hopefully how much easier that is. All right, so I got my intake set back on here, and I highly recommend when you do actually go to set it down, before you bolt it down, that you kind of lift it about that much and just kind of slide your finger underneath and make sure the gasket's actually fully in all those little grooves. So that'll make sure you don't roll that gasket. And then we're going to come over here. We're going to take a peek at our vacuum hoses on this end of them. So one of them is going to be right here adjacent to where the throttle body connects. And so we just need to push the hose onto the pipe, and then we need to bring the clamp up to it. So doing that by hand, but so the hose clamp there, and then the other guy is the big one here that goes to the booster up here, and that one should just slide in place. And then there's a clamp, a little clip up here. The hose just pops into the clip, and then we should be good to go up back there. So still got intake bolts to do, still got our little bracket over here we talked about earlier, and then I'm just going to work on getting this these little vacuum hoses back in the clips where they need to be. Also make sure that if you leave this guy attached like I did, make sure that it doesn't end up wrapped underneath the intake, where you're going to pinch off the hose and then also have an intake sealing issue. So we're going to work on getting all these little doodads plugged back in, and actually most of this stuff really didn't need to come off. So in fact, that even the 10 millimeter here could have stayed on, it looks like. I'll have to remember that next time I do these. But anyways, we'll get the intake bolt started and start buttoning this thing back together. Alrighty, so I got my intake bolts. I just snugged them back down. Don't have to get crazy tight on those either. It's, you know, compressing a plastic manifold, so you don't want to get super tight on it. We're going to do that little back bracket back in here now. And this is why I wanted to loosen up that that the bottom bolt now. It makes a little more sense. So this will make a little more sense of why we wanted to loosen up that bracket, the bottom bolt, so whenever we went to reinstall it, we didn't have to worry about the exact placement of where this guy was at. So we're going to get this bolt started into the intake. Oh, there we go. So we'll get both of the upper and lower bolts tightened back down. So we'll get those tightened down, and then we'll get our throttle body back on, and should have a few more little lines back together, and then we'll put the intake tube back on, and we'll be just about done with it. Before you install your throttle body onto your intake, double check your gasket, make sure it's there, make sure it's in the groove where it's supposed to sit. And then anytime you're bolting an assembly down, you always want to start all of the bolts independently, obviously, but you don't want to tighten it down, because, like, for instance, right now you can see how skewed that intake is, or the throttle body is. And if you tighten this guy down, you'll never be able to get the other bolt started. So it just gives you the room to wiggle a little bit more as necessary. And then I would also recommend, before you start tightening things up, go ahead and take the time right now to plug in your throttle body, because you do not want to forget to plug that dude back in. Make sure it has a nice positive click sound to it, and then we'll get the bolts torqued down, or snugged down, I should say. All right, so the throttle body is snugged back down, and we're ready to reinstall the upper intake tube, or the fresh air tube. I went ahead and fished out my mass airflow connector off the, it kind of fallen back behind the airbox some. This will make sure that I can get my hands on it and get it plugged in before we get it completely reinstalled, and it's harder to find. If you're doing a 60K, go ahead and toss your new air filter in at this point. If you haven't already, I forgot to buy mine, so I'll have to do that another day. So I just set this thing on here, and then I'm going to fish out that connector out from under it. Then we can make sure it's plugged in, listening for the click, and then we'll go ahead and pop the harness onto that back section of the airbox. And then this airbox itself is going to slide onto the throttle body first. Kind of wiggle it, get pushed in, and then we need to make sure that these tabs down here are engaging onto the bottom half of the airbox, and then should be it. Now, when you go to install these clamps, it's real easy to want to push up here, and it may work, but I usually kind of grab underneath it with my finger and kind of pull up on it, and that just allows for more flexibility on this top part. Just makes less stress on the actual clamp. So we're going to get our hose clamp installed up here. Once we push the intake tube all the way on, looks like I need to go a little bit more on the bottom side still. You can see a gap down here at the bottom. So we'll kind of push it. There's a little tab here we can push on. It's looking a little bit better. And then we'll get that 10mm started on the top up there. Get it snug down, and again, that does not have to be crazy tight at all. That's just holding the intake tube. And then we'll pop this guy in, our grommet here, like so. And then I'm going to leave that guy off to the side for the moment, so that way I have cleaner access to my 10mm, and then we'll bolt that guy in place and connect it electrically, and then we should be done, I think. Okay, hose clamp is reinstalled. We're going to pop this guy onto that retainer and go and remove our 12mm nut here, or 12mm bolt I should say, that holds the bracket on. We can then push our line in place, and our bracket should be just about lined up. Nothing crazy tight there. We're going to plug this guy in, listening for the click. And then I think last but not least, we got our PCV hose to run back across. Now this one's got this big furry insulation on it, but make sure that you get the actual hose itself installed onto the intake port and not somehow behind the intake or behind the insulation. Well, I managed to pull this side off in the process of putting that side on. Get that side fixed. In good shape there. Cool. I think we're ready to do a test fire on it. And then we'll pop the the engine cover back on it once we're happy with the way it's running. We don't have to go back into it a second time. Hopefully, fingers crossed. Let's give it a shot. Alrighty, back in the car. We'll give it a shot, see how she runs. So that's it on two trucks, the F-150 and the RX. Both of them got some spark plugs for preventative maintenance. One of them's got 100 on it, one of them's got 60 on it, and we need to pop the intake cover still, or the engine cover still on the Lexus, but we're happy with the way both those turned out. So thanks for watching my Lexus video. If you hadn't seen the F-150 video, there's a link there. And yeah, that's it. Super easy overall. I mean, obviously the F-150 was easier because it's right there on top and you don't have to pull the intake to get to it. But even that, the Lexus intake came off pretty easily. So I appreciate you checking out a video of mine, and I will catch you on the next one.